All right, everybody, in this video, I'm just gonna show you how to go about making a pinch pot bowl. So follow along with me as I create this bowl, and we're gonna be focusing on first how to create a pinch pot form. Then after that, jump into how to do some add-ons with that bowl and even some texture. Here's my design that I'm going off of. I'm going to try to create this pinch pot bowl that has a little bit of lip on the bottom here that is kind of standing on it, underneath it to make it so that it's real flat and doesn't move around. I'm gonna add this little ribbon around the top using a coil, and that's gonna be nice for the edge of the bowl on the top. And these are gonna be two little handles that'll be on the side, so when I'm picking up that bowl of hot soup, I won't be burning my fingers. I can just lift it right up off the edge on those handles. Here's my textured design. I'm gonna go with some lines and some circles between. I'm just gonna create a texture that has a nice pattern to it. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is talk about a few of the things you're gonna need when you're working with clay. That is obviously clay. You're gonna find clay that is gray here, that turns bright white when we throw it through the kiln. So we'll grab a few chunks of that. This is something called slip. Slip is super useful for when you're attaching things onto your project. It acts like a glue. It's also useful if you're trying to get rid of some cracks that might appear within the clay as you're making something. Super useful. Then we also have a couple other tools in the room. I always like using a fork to create score marks. So score marks are like little Velcro marks that we're gonna be adding onto the clay when we add more things on. And then love wooden modeling tools as well. These are very useful for when you're working on texture or connecting things together. Super nice to have those too. So to begin with, to make our pinch pot, we're going to start by taking a clump of clay, and we're gonna start to form it within our hands. Now, all this clay has actually gone through a pug mill and has been recycled and has been de-aired. So we don't have to worry about air pockets as much in this clay as we're making things, which could be an issue if you're working with clay. Wedging is something that normally you do with clay. Okay, so as you can see, I've made it into a circle. I'm just getting the clay into a form that I'm hoping to use here. And then I'm gonna start by making my pinch pot bowl a little bit flat on the top. When you're making a form like a bowl, you want it to be a little more wide than it is tall. So I'm gonna start flattening the top just a little bit. You can kind of see the form that I'm starting to make here. It's gonna be round on the underside and more flat on the top. Then I'm gonna take my thumb and I'm just gonna insert it into the very top of my project here. I'm gonna press through until it's maybe about half an inch of clay left on the bottom. So I'll take that, and I'm gonna leave my thumb on the inside of the project while I'm working on it here. So the pinch pot is made by actually just pinching. That's why it's called a pinch pot. So you're gonna take your finger that's on the inside, so your thumb, and you're gonna press it up against the fingers on the outside of the project. So as I start to press, I'm just doing little bits of pressure here. I'm gonna slowly thin the clay out, and I'm gonna keep going in a circle here. You want to avoid your project from getting a little bit too thin too quickly in some spots. So that's why I'm just going to take it slow. I'm going to keep thinning it out and slowly pressing between my thumb on the inside and my fingers on the outside. Put both thumbs in once your project is a little more wide, and you can do a bit of pinching with both thumbs on the inside and your fingers on the outside. That's another way to go. Here's a big moment to notice. If you ever have any cracks that start to appear on your project like this, you're gonna wanna take a little bit of slip in your hand. So a little bit on my finger here. I'm gonna rub it over the cracks and kind of blend it into the clay there, and you'll see that smooths it out right away. You don't wanna keep pinching and pressing right along an area where there's a crack. You gotta fix it first before you move on. If you let it go too long, the clay will remember there's a crack there, it has a very good memory, and it will appear again later on as you're working. So always just take a little bit of slip. Notice I'm not drenching the project in slip. Just putting a little bit of slip on there, blending it in, and thinning out those walls. I'm gonna keep thinning it. How you'll know that you're done thinning the walls is once your project looks the way you want, that's the first thing, but you have to have your walls between the thickness of your pinky and your thumb. You can't go thicker than your thumb because you might end up having a spot where there could be an air pocket. And anytime you're working with clay that's that thick, it doesn't really look as nice. especially if we're hand building something. It kind of looks like, oh, they should have thinned it out more. It's a lot heavier than it should be in the end. So use your clay well by thinning it out to an appropriate thickness. You'll notice I've got some more cracks showing on here, so again, I'm just gonna blend in some of that slip and keep blending it into the clay here. All right, I'm gonna show you a couple things here with the form now that I've got most of it complete. You're gonna notice I'm looking at the top edge here and I'm trying to make the shape the way that I want it. Normally you're gonna go for a circle, you could do an oval, but you have to do something that's kind of round when you're doing pinch pots. There's other methods that you can use if you wanna have something that's very angular, like a square or a triangle. So the best thing to do is to know if you've made it thin enough is actually just feel the project all around to feel between your fingers, is that thin enough? So I can feel that it is pretty good, so that means I am ready for my next step. So I'm at the point where I need to start thinking about the add-ons that I'm gonna put onto this project. So I'm gonna be adding on, again, that top lip on the edge there. I'm gonna be adding the under part, so that way it doesn't tip around as much, and I'm gonna add those handles on. So first, I'm gonna add that coil along the top edge to make that a little bit thicker and even make the bowl a little bit taller. So to make a coil, I'm gonna take some clay, I'm gonna form it into a cylinder in my hand, like this, and I'm gonna start to make it into a cylinder just by rolling it in my hands, not on the table. So depending on the clay that you're using, it may be harder or easier to make that coil. But you'll notice now that I am starting to roll it out on the table. It's a nice thing to use these mats or the wooden boards that we have to build your projects on because the clay doesn't stick. So here we are, I've been rolling out my coil. I'm rolling it out by doing full circles with my hands on here, so that way it's not just tiny little turns like this, but all the way around. It's okay if it's not a perfect circle. You just don't want it to be totally uneven in the areas that you're hoping it to make it even. So I may not care so much about the ends of this coil, but I certainly do care about the middle area that I'm actually gonna use. So I'm just rolling it out a little bit here. Now I'm gonna just size it up, see how it is looking compared to my project. So that is looking pretty good. So I've got some areas I won't be using. I can either just tear it off with my fingers or I can slice it with one of the clay tools. So again, this is gonna just raise the project up a little bit, make it a little bit taller, fit a little more soup in that bowl, and also add in an attachment. So I've got a little bit more of a complex project. So after I've sized it up, I know it's the good way, I'm gonna do something called score, slip, seal. So I'm gonna take that attachment off, and I'm going to add on some score marks. So I will just pull this up here so you can see it a little bit better. Score marks are made by taking a tool, and it can be a wooden tool or even a fork. I just use a fork because you get 4 for the price of 1 with each little swoop that you make here. But I'm gonna make some Velcro texture on the top edge where I'm gonna be adding that coil around. You just gotta get a lot of Velcro texture so that way the clay really sticks. So I do that on the top edge there, and I'm also going to do it on my attachment. So here's that coil I made. Just gonna add that same kind of texture in. This is a way to make sure that that isn't gonna fall right off after I attach it on there, and especially as it dries and then goes to the kiln. Okay, the next step here, so we got score marks, then we got slip. So I take a little bit of slip on my finger. Slip is just water mixed with clay. I just take some of the dry projects that students don't want to keep and I break them up and I put them in water. So I add that slip on there. You don't need to go over and above with the amount of slip that you use. You just need to kind of make sure that you've got enough moisture on there that when you start blending that attachment on, that it actually sticks and stays. It won't fall right off. So there we go. Slip is added on. Now I'm going to take my attachment, I'm going to put it in place. And the last part is called seal. So for sealing, I'm going to take a little bit of the clay from the attachment and I'm going to blend it in to what I'm attaching it onto. So I'll do that on the outside edge here, and I'm gonna use this clay tool to take a little bit of that clay from the top coil, and I'm blending it down to get rid of that line between them. If you like having a line there, that's something you can add in afterwards. But you certainly don't want it messing up your attachment by having it fall off, which is real easy to do. So again, take a little bit of that clay from what you're attaching on and pull that clay into the larger form that you've made. I want to mention too that after the outside is well attached, so I've got all that done, you also want to look at the other side of your attachment. So I have not blended yet on the inside edge. So to do that, I'm just going to take a little bit of the clay, and I could do this from, the clay that's on the attachment and blend it down, or I could take clay from the clay form that I'm attaching it onto and pull that up. So you can see I'm just taking this clay tool and I'm blending that line away, just so that way there's not going to be any chance for air to get in there as it's drying and causing that crack to get larger and make that project fall apart. All right, next thing I'm going to do is build my handles. So from my design, you'll remember the handles, they just look like little pieces of clay that stick out on the side. So it's not an elaborate handle that comes out like a loop. It's just going to be a tiny little chunk of clay like that. So I'm going to take a piece of this coil that I had made earlier, and I'm just going to cut it even, so that way I've got two pieces that are the exact same, because I would like that to line up so that both sides of my attachments are the same on both sides. So I can take that piece and put it on top of another chunk of the coil, cut it off. This is what I'm going to use for my handles. So now I'm going to show you how I'll put them on there. I got to add my score marks. First, line up your attachment to see where you think it would fit. So I'm going to go like that. Just going to make a little marks that way I know where I need to do my score marks. Then I'm going to add those score marks on. Do the same thing on this one. Slip. Score, slip, then seal. So I'm going to put this in place like that. And I'm pressing down to make sure that I can get that slip to kind of come out along the edges. That way I know that it's really well attached. And now I'm going to seal with the clay tool here. Blend that on down. And I'm actually going to do quite a bit of the forming of my handle after it's already on the project here. So I'll kind of get into this little line here and blend that as well. So now to make my handle, I'm just going to press in on the handle like this to get kind of a nice edge to it there. And you can do a lot of forming and making the project look exactly the way you want after you've got your attachment on. All right, both handles are in place. Now I'm going to add my bottom section on the project. So to do that, I'm actually going to take another coil that I make. So I got a little bit of coil here that's been sitting out and is drying out, so I'm just adding a little bit of slip into it. Not that you have to do that necessarily. You just got a new piece of clay that you can take out of the clay barrel or the bag that you've got your clay in. So got a little bit of clay on there, or slip I should say. Rolling out a little bit of a thinner coil this time. And if I get any spots where I notice cracks, I'm just going to blend those away. Now I'm going to flip my project upside down. I'm going to apply this coil on the underside. And I'm just going to size it up here, make sure I've got the size that I want. The reason I'm not doing this by creating just a circle and flattening the circle is that I don't want there to be a chance that I might have an air pocket that I'm creating on the bottom of my project. So anytime that you're attaching on something, there's a risk that you might have an air pocket there, and then it blasts right off as it's drying. You don't want that. So here I've got it. Now I'm going to do the same exact thing that I did with my other attachments. I'm going to be score slip sealing it on there. All right, our last step to this project is going to be adding the texture on. So from my planning sheet, I'm going to do some lines and some circles. The lines I'm going to create with a wooden modeling tool, and a circle I'm going to create by using a pen. So I'm just going to be creating that pattern all the way around my project. Now it's going to be up to you as to how you want that texture to look, right? You might choose that you want to have a little bit more texture in some areas and less texture in other areas. That's all up to you for how it's going to look. So for mine, again, it's just going to be all the way around on the underside here. So I'm going to start by creating a line that is just going to match underneath the handles here. So I'm just kind of not going in too far with my line first, just to make sure that I'm happy with how that's looking. This is just going to be a way for me to guide where it's going to be. So again, I'm just taking this line, pressing it in, going all the way around. You might find that you'll be misforming parts of your project if you roll it around like I just did there. Okay, so now I'm going to use this wood modeling tool, and I'm going to press in some lines. So I'm just going to try to equally space them, move all the way around my project. All right, so now that I got the lines in place, I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to create some dots. The texture that I'm going to do is right along the bottom rim here. So again, I can use any kind of tool that I want. Maybe I'll actually use one of these wooden tools, but kind of just create this little etch like this as I go around. Have some texture on there, make it look interesting. So a project like this is going to look pretty cool after it goes through the kiln and has some color on there too.